What do you feel about being back 55 years after your stay in Berlin?
Is it 55?
I think so.
Well, it's a lifetime. In any case, it's my feelings are very mixed. Feelings of tremendous sadness at the disappearance of so many important monuments of my childhood. At my age, I can call my youth childhood. And the Brandenburger Tor, for example. When I arrived here, I would walk through that Brandenburger Tor. I used to walk by it, not dreaming that the little man with a funny Charlie Chaplin mustache would one day try to destroy the Western world. But I arrived here fresh out of the university. I was 19 years and 3 months old, or 2 months old, really. And I was supposed to enter the University of Berlin, which again was down along the Utter and Linden, this beautiful street through Berlin. I was supposed to register there.
Why was Berlin chosen for
Well, Berlin was chosen, like everything else in my life up to that moment, by my father, who had come to America in the year 1889 at the age of 17. He came from Berlin. He was born in Alexanderplatz, which is now, of course, over in East Berlin. And Alexanderplatz was he was born right across from police headquarters. He couldn't have been more of a Berliner. But he was 17 years old and convinced that he could become a poet in America and make his fortune. Now, this is insanity. But it's the kind of insanity that became genetic, because we all, the Mankiewicz that now exist in America, all stem from that one crazy genetic seed of that 17-year-old German who left his 2 sisters. Well, that's all that was left of the family. So that when he left, he really carried with him the entire Mankiewicz name to America. Obviously, from the spelling, it must be Polish in origin, but we don't know how and where and when. He had his degree from Heidelberg, and must have been, as I was, extremely young, getting his education over with as quickly as possible, because he then he got his master's degree in Columbia University and his PhD, and of course went on to become a very distinguished professor of modern languages, philology, and at the end, educational methods. He was quite a fellow.
And your mother was of the same origin? Was she from European origin?
My mother, again, a complete mystery to me. We never spoke for some reason or other. As you can imagine, the conversation was constant in our family at a very loud pitch. My mother came from a tiny little German-speaking enclave, Baltic enclave called Kurland.
So what did you do in Berlin? How did you spend your time?
Well, what happened was, I said, well, I'm obviously not going to get my father's little allowance that he would send me every week to be a student and eventually a teacher. And so I said, I've got to get a job. And I had 2 things going for me. I knew that my brother was in Hollywood. And I knew that he had met Erich Pommer, who was then the head of UFA. And Mr. Pommer gave me a job. I translated the subtitles on German films going to America and to the United Kingdom.
Did you meet some people of the German cinema at the time, or through Pommer?
Well, I met nobody through Pommer. No. I barely met Pommer through Pommer, except when he fired me. Yes, that was the beginning of disaster setting. First of all, I'll tell you why Palmer fired me. It was one of those ridiculous reasons. And it's also my first experience with a major studio head and why they function the way they do. Because Harry Cohn would have done the same. I got a phone call one day from Fräulein Sonnenschein saying, Mr. Palmer wants to see you right away. And I went over, and she said, go right in. And Palmer sat there with my page of titles in front of him. And he looked at me and says, your English is not as good as you say it is. I said, I'm terribly sorry, Mr. Palmer. What did you say, my English? I graduated with honors in English. I don't understand what you're talking about. He said, Schumacher. How would you translate that in English? I said, well, a Schumacher is a shoemaker. He says, no, it's not. It's a cobbler. I said, cobbler? Hey, that's a very old English word. I mean, they may still use it in England, but these terms are for America. We call them shoemakers. Whipped out an English dictionary, pointed to it. Cobbler. You're fired. And that's how that was my first taste of Hollywood. Have I told you the story of Professor John Erskine?
No.
It's a fascinating story because it is, I think, the perfect story of the illusion that breaks. That one great illusion in your youth that smashes like a piece of china. Professor Erskine sent for me. He was my tutor in English literature, and he himself was a very well-known professor. And he said to me, look, Joe, I was still in my cap and gown, had my diploma. He said, we think you can write. You may. We want you back here at Columbia, we think. Your father feels that you should go to the University of Berlin, brush up on the German drama, Schiller, Goethe, Lessing, and so weiter. Brush up on that, and then you will be admitted to Oxford, have your master's, and come back to teach. And he says, now, the reason I sent for you is we know that your brother Herman is already in Hollywood. I want you to promise me that you will not go to Hollywood. There's nothing more easily given at the age of 19 than an oath. So I arrived in Berlin, and this city has had an effect upon me that nothing in my professional or almost my personal life has ever had. I fell in love with Berlin of 1928 because there really never was, for a young man whose interests lay in theater, lay in music, lay in the excitement of drama, than this city. And if you will forgive my saying so, everything that Paris was described as, Berlin was. Berlin came to an end rather quickly, although I could have gone on forever. It seems that I wrote a check, as young men sometimes do, having a very good time, for more money than I had in the bank. So the bank teller just sort of bowed and went to the phone and called me and said, young man, I suggest you leave Germany rather quickly. So that night I was on the train to Paris. I arrived in Paris, and it was like going from day to night. I arrived at the Gare du Nord. I had $1.68 in American money. And from that moment, I did not have one friendly word spoken to me by any Frenchman I met. I couldn't get work. Finally, I got that cable from my brother Herman, saying, in effect, enough of this academic nonsense. He knew that I was not pursuing the studies. Come to Hollywood, I can get you a job. And he got me a job. So I went to Hollywood. Now, I don't know whether you ever went from New York to Hollywood by train. The train was coming at 9 hours late. And I sent my brother a telegram, which he was very proud of, and which he has carried and been printed in books about it. But I sent my brother a telegram saying, horses eaten by wolves gold safe, however, Joe. So then I was ready to work in Westerns, and he thought that was terribly funny, and it was my passport to Hollywood. He met me at the train. He says, I'm taking you to a very big party tonight at Dusty Lasky's beach house in Santa Monica. The night I arrived in Hollywood, imagine, I don't know, imagine the man who discovered Tutankhamun's tomb. I stared, there was Clara Bow, Gary Cooper, Olga Baklanova, William Powell, Kay Francis. I mean, it was like being alone in a candy store. Nobody's watching. What did I look at? But how do I dare go to anyone to talk to? And suddenly I saw a back, a familiar back. I couldn't place it, but I knew that back. And it turned around, and it was Professor John Erskine, the professor who made me swear I would never lower myself by going to Hollywood. He says, what are you doing here? And God gave me the right answer. I said, well, what are you doing here, Professor Erskine? He says, I'm working at Warner Brothers. Where are you working? And I tell you, Michel, an illusion shattered. So there were many to shatter after that one, but that was the basic one.
What was your relationship with your brother Herman, who was very famous and very established when you arrived in Hollywood?
Herman helped me. That is, he got me a job at Paramount as a junior writer. And the rest was, as I imagine, up to me. Our personal relationships were on and off, up and down, the way a very young brother is with an older brother. See, he had been, in many ways, a heroic figure to me. I would say, as I told you before, when I was 8, he was 20. And when I arrived in Hollywood, he was that figure still. Because of that telegram, which I told you about before, he greeted me, and we were off to a wonderful start. But I have really no memories of battles, except I imagine after I began to get successful in certain ways, he felt perhaps I was encroaching on his territory, or I felt he was demanding too much of me. I don't know, he was an incredibly witty man. Ad hominem. It was a wit that was unique, almost. It was a savage wit. But unfortunately, it was nothing he could write. He couldn't write wittily. He had an oral wit, which I think was unequaled in Hollywood at the time. He was the perfect writer for a film about William Randolph Hearst, for example.
Citizen Kane.
There was no better writer for that. But I told you before, I never became aware. I was never aware, really, of his putting me down in any way or saying anything about me until I read Pauline Kael's book. And then suddenly it came gushing forth from all sides. Yes, he did, but I didn't feel it that way.
When did you start to be interested in psychoanalysis?
I was always a midget in a family of giants. Arguments went on, thundered over my head, and I wouldn't know how to cope with them. And I lived with a great many fantasies, a tremendous number of fantasies, as a child. And one of them, I imagine, was that of being a psychiatrist and solving everybody's problems I'd heard talk from my father and some of his friends about them. And give us a Herr Freud, Mr. Freud and Adler and various people.
But I think you underwent an analysis yourself.
Oh, yes, so that was much later.
When?
Much later. That was in Hollywood. That was after I developed the most compulsive of my compulsions, you could call them. I was a compulsive gambler for a while. I was a compulsive sailor. I had 3 sailing vessels in my fleet. I think it was Billy Wilder's. I got the second largest fleet in the Atlantic and Pacific, rather. And the gambling was a very destructive compulsion. And I went into analysis to straighten myself out because I was losing an awful lot of money and a lot of self-respect, and was fortunate enough to have Otto Fenichel, who was a pupil and co-worker of Freud's, was one of the group of refugee analysts and psychiatrists who came over from Vienna at the time. And I analysis about 3 years. It was a character analysis. It was a very deep, searching, and extremely painful analysis, and I think a helpful one.
When did you decide to leave Hollywood to come and live in the East?
Very early on, I knew that this was not for me as a place to grow up, to live and mature. I mean, I had interests other than who was making what film and how much was this film grossing. At the time, they had a referendum in Los Angeles about enlarging the public library system. The results of this referendum came out, and I think for the first time, to my knowledge, in the history of civilization, a majority of the people voted against any public library. And this was very typical of Los Angeles at that time. They'd have polls. Who was the man that most represented California and the city of Los Angeles, in your opinion? Well, it would be the football coach of UCLA, running away. And
So the reason why you left?
it's a very strange phenomenon that Los Angeles, for example, which has a population of some 2.5 million people, there is no theater. There are physical theaters which are occupied by so-called subscription audiences. The wives of the oil people and big airplane, they buy the subscriptions, and the husband sits through the productions, which are usually big musical productions brought in from New York.
But since you are so interested in the theater, you were not tempted one day to direct in the theater?
Always. I still am. I still want to, but I'm terrified of it. I've always wanted to write for the theater, but this sounds silly, perhaps a little pretentious. I don't think I don't find what I write good enough for the theater. There's something about writing for the theater that's kept me from doing it. I'm
directing?
Directing is a different matter.
Yes, you did not direct. You directed an opera.
Well,
you directed La Bohème.
Yes. Well, again, I love opera. I particularly like lyrical opera. Bohème, I always thought was misdirected because it followed the opera cliches. Again, I violated traditions. And I was roundly scolded by the good opera critic of the New York Times. You see, La Bohème is supposedly a story of a seamstress, a little seamstress who lives in her attic and does these lovely little bits of lace and so on. In reality, it's a story of a whore, which she is. And Rudolpho has reason to be jealous because she's been sleeping around with other men.
When did you leave Hollywood?
For example,
At what time was it?
Immediately after I won 4 Oscars.
That was on...
Because I said to myself, look, if you don't get out now, you'll never get out. And nobody can say, oh, he's leaving because he can't get a job. Because I had this incredible bit of luck. I won 2 Oscars, and the very next year won the same 2 Oscars, which hadn't been done before and hadn't been done since. And this was the time, if I were going to leave, this was the time to leave.
So what do you do here when you don't shoot, or what is your hobbies in the country?
I walk a great deal. I love walking. I read a great deal. And I enjoy being this close to New York City, which is the creative well. It's the creative source of American American acting, writing, directing, thinking.
Yes. I was asking you the question because when I think of all your films, there are not many outdoor films. The first Western you made there was a Crooked Man when you were 60, and it was a Western inside.
Crooked Man is one of the very few pictures that show in a Western town, a busy Western street, horses running up and down, pulling carts, but there's never any horse shit on the ground. There are 2 things I think that the audiences know, that in no American film before 1952 anyway, will you find a toilet, because Americans did not have toilets in bathrooms. The Hayes office would not permit them. And for some reason or other, there was an accepted understanding that the moment a horse relieved himself, which is quite natural, you'd yell, cut, and somebody would rush out with brooms and shovels and sweep it. Why these Western streets, no matter how realistic they were, even with Jack Ford, go see if you can find a horse shit. And to me, this was my own little private triumphs that I try to find in my movies. Is when Fonda was chasing Kirk Douglas at the end, going through his woods, he looked off, and there was a mound of fresh horse manure, and he knew that's the way to do it. If you make a Western, I don't think this necessarily be a matter of dramatizing some inner urge or inner interest. Naturally, I was attacked for having made that picture. One of your favorite reviewers is Pauline Kael. I don't read her. I was told she devoted most of her attack to the fact that how dare I put so much corruption on the screen. When Barefoot Contessa opened, Crowder's review dealt almost entirely with how can Mankiewicz be interested in these people who do nothing but squander money on the Riviera. And everything that Fellini dealt with in his Adult Swim, everything. Federico and I discussing Barefoot Contessa. And in fact, I could not make Barefoot Contessa the way it should have been made. The censorship laws were such that I couldn't. But again, Bosley Crowther saying, dissolute, wastefuls, why bother to put them on the screen? He happened to write that, the poor man, just before a period started in which nothing was used on the screen but the depiction of wastrels and horrible, corrupt people. But there was the corruption that appealed to me, and the cynicism of it.
Mm-hmm. You have always been fascinated with actors, and 2 of your films, All About Eve and The Barefoot Contessa, are about actresses, one on the stage and one on the screen. And they are the 2 films where you have a fragmented view of a person. Now, why? Because you can see only an actress through several prisms, or...
No, I don't think that I have a fragmented view. I would think of almost any character I write. I don't think anybody exists as like one pure note of music, one color. People are fragmented. Critics are fragmented. You're fragmented. I'm fragmented. We live and face conflicts in many different ways. And we live in many different tenses. We live in the past, we live in the future, we live in the present. I think unfragmented people are animals. We're dogs, cats.
Yes, but still, actors for you are different. I mean, by studying them and writing for them and producing them and then directing them, how did you come to see them? I mean, the way you see Eve and Margot in All About Eve.
Well, Eve, I don't consider Eve an actress. Margot is an actress. By that I don't mean don't consider Anne Baxter an actress. But I go to great pains in the screenplay to show that Eve is not an animal that's indigenous to the theatrical jungle. Typing pools are full of Eves. You get their eye on whoever's the top. The garment business is full of Eves. Eve is a predatory animal, that's all she is. Eve doesn't have to act. Margot has to act in order to be. And that is the source of her problem.
The character of Maria Vargas, played by Ava Gardner in The Barefoot Contessa, was inspired by your observations of the Hollywood scene.
That was to be the Hollywood Cinderella story. I don't think anywhere in the film does it say that she was a great actress. It just said she was a sensation at the box office. And it was spoken by the press agent. The idea was to take the banality of the Hollywood Cinderella story and apply the irony of the world in which it plays, which is the young girl dreams of someday becoming famous and finding her Prince Charming and living happily ever after. And the Hollywood version is that he turns out to be either homosexual or impotent. In the end, it becomes a tragic experience for her.
You use the flashback techniques in many of your films, like Somewhere in the Night, Letter to Three Wives, All About Eve, Suddenly Last Summer, The Barefoot Contessa. It's very peculiar to your work.
I don't think you would be here today without your past. And your being here today involves your future. And I know this all sounds like just notes on a course in dialectics. But I've said this, it's become almost a trite version of what I believe. But in the morning, whether you're male or female, whether you're putting on your face or whether you're shaving, you are writing a screenplay. What's going to happen that day? What you think you are? Well, the phone can ring. That screenplay's screwed up. Somebody else's screenplay interferes with it. Life losses up the screenplay. It's a favorite theme of mine, too. But it's intertwined with the same thing. Now, I can think of no better way to tell the story, let's say All About Eve, than a young lady receiving the highest accolade of her profession. And 7 people, 6 people, 5 people looking at her, aware of their part in this process by which she achieved this thing, and be able to tell them all and bring them all together, and then have this young woman go on and say things which have an entirely new meaning because we've seen what happened earlier, and we know what stood up as a young, wide-eyed, lovely young actress sits down as a scheming, conniving bitch who has just been lying. The past and the future at this moment create the present. To me, those are the most exciting stories. It can be told that way. I don't think of it as a technique. I mean, an artificial technique.
At one point, you wished you had have the Alexandria Quartet by Lawrence Durrell, but you never found the financing.
That's the great disappointment of my life. If he is to write, this is what Durrell called the space and time continuum, 4 stories about the same woman, told by 4 men. Oh no, 3 men and a woman, I think. Told about the same woman, and all 4 wrong. At the end of all 4, you find out Juliet is something quite different. Justine, rather. They made a film of Justine. I wrote a very complete treatment, but unfortunately I put on the frontispiece that this treatment would be indistinguishable to anyone who had not read the 4 novels. And that wiped out the entire studio of Fox, because none of it read the 4 novels, except young Richard Zanuck. He read it and wanted to do it. But of course, after the great trauma of Cleopatra, I couldn't possibly work with Mr. Zanuck Sr. again in any way, and that was the end of it. It's a great disappointment that I really wanted to do. That would have been my definitive film, I think, about women. I don't think anybody will ever write a film or a book about a remarkable woman in which everything will be known. I think you can do it about a man, but you can't do it about a woman. And so that you could write a complete, definitive biography of Winston Churchill, I don't think anyone would write a definitive biography of his wife. A much more complicated person than Winston Churchill. I've just removed it from fiction for a moment. And that's why the female roles, writing females, directing females, has always been infinitely more exciting, infinitely more rewarding, and infinitely easier than men.
Yes, you said that time was central, but space also, and it's related to time in your films. I mean, the importance of the set and the importance of the house, like in The Ghost and Mrs. Muir or Dragon Week, or the hothouse in Suddenly Last Summer, the palace in The Honeypot, or in the house in Sleuth. I mean, the people who are isolated in a place and they only live in their past. I mean, this seems to be quite obsessional in your films.
Well, no, I think environment is essential. A proper environment is essential dramatically. I think it can help. I think, again, it can be supportive to whatever the theme is. The clocks in Harry Potter really supported my theme of time. The toys in Sleuth. The games that people play on each other. You know? And before you know it, game playing becomes a very serious matter.
But you are attracted by these kind of decadent survivors that live in these mansions, isolated from the world. I mean,
I have such a tremendous choice of things to write about. Because I'm not all that involved with the unwashed and the unwanted. Granted, they've got their problems, and they're dreadful. And I want to help in every way I can, but I don't want to write about them. Because I believe there are people of intellect, people who can read and write, people of quality, if you like. And when I say quality, I mean quality. Very brainy people. They also have problems worth dramatizing. But why must all of our concerns, I'm talking now as a dramatist, as a director, I'm not talking now as a human being who has the responsibility, of course, to pay his taxes and to contribute to charitable causes. I'm talking about a representative of, please forgive the impertinence, of the arts, the writing, directing arts. Why must we always write about the lowest common denominator of humanity and find our interests there?
In Sleuth, I mean, the Cockney who wants to win over, or in Five Fingers, he's from modest origin, and he wants to make up for his modest origin.
Once when he was a cabin boy on a ship, he saw a fellow with a white jacket, dinner jacket, and he wanted to become that guy. The only way he could do it was to spy. And so that's rags to riches. That's not obsession with that's a good old American rag, Horatio Alger.
But what attracted you in Five Fingers, in this spy story?
I don't think there was a tragedy. The tragedy was, I think, the idiocy of both sides in the war. The idiocy of the English for sending the Operation Overlord down there, and the idiocy of the Germans who literally did not believe what this man was giving them. That's all true, you know. But the other story was fictional. I've met Aiello. The truth is different. But yet there was something marvelous about the Mason and Danielle Darrieux, and this fact that I was able to avoid the banality. They didn't end each other's arms. She tried to double cross her, she would have, and he laughed because she got caught. And they both remained true to their characters.
But all your films end rather tragically or badly, except perhaps People Will Talk.
Well, I
don't have many happy endings.
I never thought, it's funny, to this moment, I've never thought in terms of happy or unhappy endings. I've thought in terms of correct and incorrect endings.
Now, going back to actors, how do you work with them?
Before we do anything, we go through the screenplay with them, and I make it very clear, look, if there are things that you don't understand, things that you don't think you can say, let's have it all out, let's straighten it out. Because once we, what I call, lock up the script, that's it, and there's not going to be any rewriting on the set. And there never has been. All About Eve, as a film, is syllable for syllable, as it was in the screenplay. The most exciting single moment of my life was during Julius Caesar, when Marlon Brando was to come and make his famous friends, Roman countrymen, lend me your ear speech. As any director would be, I was more terrified of this piece than any other in the entire play. Because every high school student has said that at one time or another, or tried to. And I had these citizens of Rome, these extras, whom I had spoken to earlier and said, look, you're not extras, you're citizens. And I want you for once to play parts, because Mr. Shakespeare refers to you as citizenry. And they were with me. And we were rehearsing. When you do Shakespeare, you'd better rehearse. And James Mason, as Brutus, was addressing them, telling them why he had to kill Caesar. And they were very moved by his speech. Most of these extras had never heard it before. So much so that when Marlon appeared, carrying the body of Caesar in his arms, they, who now approved of Caesar's assassination, they didn't like Marlon. They didn't want to hear him. Even though Brutus said, I want you to listen to Mark Antony, and left. And Marlon was alone with the assassinated body of Caesar and a crowd who was booing him. And he started to speak. Friends, Romans, countrymen, and I couldn't hear him from where I was watching the stage, watching the rehearsal, making my notes. And he started again. Friends, Romans, countrymen. And they wouldn't let him go on. And finally, he burst out in a fury at them. Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. And I felt a chill go up my spine. Because for the first time, I realized why that genius of geniuses, Mr. Shakespeare, had written the word lend. That was the cue. That was the clue. You don't have to listen to me forever, but give me a chance to speak. And that most magnificent of all writers and psychiatrists knew the word lend was the only proper word, and took us, we were off. That's excitement. That's the excitement of discovery that can come with an actor like Marlon and a writer like Shakespeare.
How was it working with Brando, who came from the actor studio? when you shot Julius Caesar and Guys and Dolls, and he was playing with actors coming either from the Hollywood scene or from the stage, the British stage, which were completely different schools of acting.
Marlon Brando, we have to realize to begin with, is and was and is, whichever way you want it, a great, great acting talent. Probably the best American acting talent I've known. I don't think Marlon is a product of the Actors Studio. I think that's greatly overrated. I think it helped him. As Harry Dawes says in that unknown film, The Barefoot Contessa, when she said, "Will you teach me to act?" Harry Dawes says, "Nobody can teach you to act, but if you can act, I can help you." Now, I think that the Actors Studio, because of its highly charged group of actors, more than anything else, and the fact that they all emerged on the scene at roughly the same time, helped each other, and there was a sort of style. Now, this style was fine as long as it was called upon to carry out the needs to play lower middle class working people in a lower middle class society, or to call upon emotions that are not necessarily those of people who were literate and articulate. Now, in my case, if you make me choose between an emotionally involved actress and an intellectually involved actress, both with the same equipment, I'll pick the intellectually involved one every time. I don't give a damn whether the girl cries real tears. That's not her function. Her function is to make the audience cry real tears.
How was it as an experience to work in Sleuth with two actors for a period of weeks and only two actors in one set?
This is an extremely happy and fortunate gamble. Sleuth, I wanted Sleuth to be a bit of self-satisfaction. Could I, with two good actors, and somebody else's screenplay, not my screenplay, could I, by just using two actors as the only two living creatures on the screen, not a dog, a goldfish, a bird, nothing, by simply the manipulation and the sheer artistry, these two men, in conflict with each other, and the various combinations and commutations you could get out of performances. Could I keep an audience interested for 2 hours? And we did.
When you did All About Eve, you used the idea of the award to create a fourth theater award.
In a way, I think the highest honor I've ever had as a professional creator of entertainment is that nature has imitated my art. Because in order to have the Sarah Siddons Award, I had to create the Sarah Siddons Society. And since the 18th century London theater is my hobby, I knew about Sarah Siddons. I knew about Reynolds' portrait of her as the tragic muse. And I said, my God, that would make a marvelous theatrical trophy. And I had the prop department make up a trophy. Now, here is really for the benefit of those who have ever heard of the Sarah Siddons Award. It's an award given by the Sarah Siddons Society in Chicago. And next to the Tony Award, they tell me it's the second most sought after award in the American theater today. Among those who won it are Betty Davis, Helen Hayes, Ernest Holmes, And for more than 30 years, in all seriousness, what I created as a satiric object has become, in fact, a very serious object which actresses work very hard to attain. The theater is a great love of mine, and I find a tremendous recreation in reading about the 18th century. I first became attracted to it, or whether first or finally, was when I started wondering about women. Since my chief interest as a writer, as a director, has always been in more or less in the female and the male scoundrel. Because to write about a male who's not a scoundrel is impossible. He's impossibly dull. That's why there's never been a successful movie that I know of about a minister. They're allowed to get married, right? Priests can't. That makes priests a sex symbol on the screen. I'm about to divert myself, but I was once called to Louis Mayer's office, and there was a representative of the Protestant churches of America. And Mayer always called upon me to do these impossible things. His nickname for me was Harvard, although I went to Columbia. He called me Harvard, but I think that's the only college he knew of. And the representative of the Protestant ministry was there to say, wait a minute, why are all of these films, we're not objecting, mind you, that Bing Crosby, Spencer Tracy, Ingrid Bergman, nuns, priests, we think that's fine. But why don't you make a film about a Protestant minister? And Mayer said to me, answer the man. And I realized suddenly that, of course, an audience of women come into a theater and they see Spencer Tracy or Bing Crosby as a priest. Now, what is the first thought that must cross the young woman or the young mind is, he's not allowed to have anything to do with women. Therefore, by next decade, he becomes a real sex object. And similarly, when you get a beautiful woman like Ingrid Bergman, who has taken the vows of chastity, this makes her a very exciting female, particularly when you know she's having an affair with Rossellini.
But besides the women, is it also the rationality that you like in the 18th century? Because your films show an extreme rationality with the fear of something passionate coming up.
I think I told you, one of the three slogans that my father gave me to live by, which I've tried to live by, yes, one of the most important is the 18th century slogan of Dr. Johnson's, relieve your mind of cant. And cant is, quite frankly, the motivating word for most of what we do today. We are living in an age of growing illiteracy, like a growing cancer. And we're also living, I am afraid, in an age of, the French had a great word for it, la précieuse ridicule. Show me 100 young people who are going to the university and say, I want to study film. And I will show you 95 who just don't want to study, period. They want to sit and look at movies. So this is what I think Dr. Johnson meant by cant. Not, the evasion of the truth. And the more we live in it, the more we evade the truth. And this is what I try to do with my films. But within the limits I'm permitted to, I like to look at the truth of the milieu in which I live and work. You can look at it wittily. And I think sometimes you have to look at it with wit, because otherwise you'd cry.